In this episode of Vinyl Haul, I've got nearly all death metal albums, but maybe some thrash weaving its way into a couple of those records. Plus, I have a release that might remind some of Typo Negative, or not. Anyway, stick around and let's get to some records. First up is the third studio album from American death thrash band Molder. This is Catastrophic Reconfiguration, released in 2024 by Prosthetic Records. So the opening title track begins with a very short flourish of sci-fi soundscape distortion, but quickly slams into the barrage of dB drums, pulverizing riffage, and the gasping and growling vocals of Aaron Pankey. It's kind of a fusion of John Tardy and Martin Van Drunen, which goes well with this band's salute to the filthier sounds of old-school death metal from the likes of Autopsy, and maybe a bit of classic Pestilence at times. Especially dig the drowning effects on the vocals during the bridge of Frothing, which I think any horror fan who truly loves swampy death metal can appreciate. Really love the sludgy and very audible bass guitar in select tracks, notably in the beginning of Pulped. Bass is definitely well utilized and tough as nails on this record, with some additional cool runs and slides here and there, and plenty of double bass drum to keep the heavy rhythm moving along. When the guitar riffs go slow, there's certainly a head-banging groove there, but always punishing and heavy. Really loving the classic Death Meets Sabbath doom that opens the track Bursted Innards, very cool. Some subtler atonal chord accents pop in at times on the record, giving the tracks a bit of color. Solos are often heavy with dibombs and treble picking, but also with a melodic sensibility that might remind one of similar approaches from older death metal that dabbled into this as well, including Obituary and Death. Production overall is certainly of the classic era, and especially hearing quite a bit of the early 90s in that regard. In fact, the album was actually tracked in a basement and then later mixed and mastered by Greg Wilkinson, who's handled production for, among other bands, Autopsy, specifically the modern material from them, and that would make a whole lot of sense considering he's actually in Autopsy. And that choice of producers seems to make sense for this band as well. Anyways, vinyl variant on this one is 1LP Blue Ooze. It's limited to 450 copies worldwide. There you are. It's also available in Puke Green at 250 copies, but a lot of places are sold out of that variant now. Here's the insert with amazing pictures of the band members, as well as lyrics and credits on the reverse. Favorites on this one, definitely Catastrophic Reconfiguration, as well as Masked in Mold and Bursted Innards. Also, the final track, Nothing Left to Ooze, utterly kills, and some clear nods to Exhumed, so toss that one into the mix as well. So anyways, a solid and crushing death metal record, respectful of the old school, but also keeping things current with a load of variation and a more modern aggression that really gives this band some distinction from the pack. As a result, I'm really wanting to go back to the other two albums and re-listen to them because this is killer stuff, and I'm so glad I finally bought this album. Definitely want to see Molder live as well. Next is the fourth studio album from American death metal band Sentient Horror. This is In Service of the Dead, released in 2024 by Redefining Darkness Records. So the album punches in right away with speedy buzzsaw guitars and deep yelly gutturals atop super blasting drums. Some of the rapid riffing style, despite the HM2 drench, brings some pinches of early brick death into the mix as well. Maybe Benediction, but by way of Entombed. Also, the material sits firmly in knuckle-dragging death, but plenty of change-ups keep it from stagnating for very long, including some catchy choruses, and Undead Mutation certainly comes to mind in that regard. And also, despite otherwise obvious comparisons to early Swede death here, the vocals steer into a lot more of a Corpse Grinder territory than anything Entombed or Dismember gave us. Solos are often rapid but wailing and melodic and provide a nice contrast to the occasionally creepy slow to mid-paced crunch from the rest of the band, as the speed is often reserved for verse and chorus parts of tracks. Not quite breakdowns, but things certainly drop a touch, which is the perfect moment to showcase solo work. Overall, there's a sort of basic death metal framework here, but it is broken up with fairly smart tempo shifts, and again, the solo work. I mean, they're not reinventing the wheel here, but they are giving that wheel their own spin, enough to pull it out of any sort of predictability. Anyways, vinyl variant on this one is 1LP Green Decay. There you are. It's also available in Rotten Yellow. Great names, of course. Also comes with an insert. Full lyrics on one side, the rest of the lyrics, credits, and picture of the band on the reverse. And as for favorites, definitely The Way of Decay, also Cadaverous Hordes, and the very strong album closer, In Service of the Dead. Music video is available for Undead Mutation. You can find that one at the Redefining Darkness YouTube channel. So a wealth of catchy choruses, soaring solos, and riff variety amidst some otherwise blasty caveman death metal. Overall highly effective and bang-worthy, and enough to make me regret having not picked up their previous record, Rites of Gore, when I should have. Of course, it's never too late to go back into a band's catalog, and I'll likely be doing that very, very soon. Definitely enjoyed this one. Next up is the 5th EP from American death metal band Mammoth Grinder. This is Undying Spectral Resonance, released in 2024 by Relapse Records. So for those not aware, Mammoth Grinder is the brainchild of Chris Ulsh, who you might also know as the drummer for Power Trip. And while he does have a full band, this EP was produced entirely by Ulsh, with some help from producer Arthur Risk, who also plays a solo on the track Decrease the Peace. Production is a little cleaner than previous releases from this band, but not enough to steal the grit or punch from the music. And given Ulsh's connection to Power Trip, you can imagine that this too would have some hardcore influence, though now mixing with death metal instead of thrash, but also nowhere near as conspicuous. The record opens with Corpse of Divinant with an ambient and hellish buildup, quickly bringing in some grind riffing with a pinch of carcass worship in the mix. Lots of whammy soloing between the growls and relentless crunch. The title track follows with a slow, dirgy first half, but shifts into some serious Entombed vibes. Flipping over to side 2 is the instrumental track Call from the Frozen Sticks, which has a spacey and ambient drone to it with distorted and distant snare beats, as well as ethereal moans and synths. It's sufficiently dark and perhaps might bring Blood Incantation to mind. Some might feel it breaks the flow of an otherwise up-tempo death metal record, and I guess you could make a case for that. Now, would I have preferred it at the end of the track listing instead? Probably, but I do dig it, and in any case, they have done this before, given the intro to their Cosmic Crypt album. Next is Decrease the Peace with an utterly head-banging main riff and some pinch harmonics straight out of the 80s death playbook. Arthur Risk's solo here is certainly layered and heavily distorted, overall pretty satisfying. And then we have the track Obsessed with Death, ending off the EP with a speedy and somewhat grindy number, clearly bringing in some more of that sweet death influence mentioned before. And since this is an EP clocking in a little over 14 minutes, it's safe to say that the tracks are quite short, averaging between 2.5 and 3 minutes in length, with the instrumental being the longest song at about 3.5 minutes. Anyways, vinyl variant on this one is 1 LP Blue and Red Galaxy Effect Merge, limited to 1,168 copies, because it's Relapse. Also got an insert with some cool art here, as well as the lyrics on the reverse. Of course, favorite tracks, you got to throw in that title track. It's pretty amazing. Also, Decrease the Peace. And speaking of the former, there is a visualizer video available for that title track. You can hear it at the Relapse Records YouTube channel. This is definitely 14 minutes of music that goes by way too fast, which is to say that it does an excellent job of building anticipation for a new full-length album from the band, which I hope happens. Next is the second studio album from American death metal band Suffer. This is Grand Canvas of the Aesthete, released in 2024 by Wise Blood Records. And since there are a few American death metal bands with this name, this one is specifically from South Dakota, here in the United States. Anyways, the title track opens the album with a short ambient spoken intro, but quickly jumps to a slow, menacing riff and snarling vocals, and there's no denying the Carcass influence both here and throughout, whether it's the abrupt shifts between two distinct vocal styles, or the crunching guitar tone, or even the more modern Carcass melodic soloing. And I gotta say, I'm really digging the melodicism in the opening of Plentiful, Copious, Bountiful, or the midsection of Carnal Flesh Parade as examples. However, they deviate from the template just enough to keep the copycat label more or less off of them, but admittedly not by a lot. During some of the more dark groove passages, I'm also catching some hints of Covenant-era Morbid Angel, and not just in the instrumentation, but also in some of the vocal cadences, though not too egregious. Speaking of which, vocals are often reasonably clear and coherent, despite the growl-snarl combo, so you might not even need that lyric sheet as often as you would with other death metal bands. There are also 3 guitarists in this band, which I would assume contributes to the overall filling of the space that goes on this record. You definitely get a well-rounded sound on this one. Anyways, vinyl variant on this one is 1 LP Chaos Color, which means each copy is uniquely pressed with random eco-friendly recycled inks, so they're calling that Chaos. And why not? Variants on that was limited to 200 copies. You also get an insert with full lyrics on one side, lyrics, picture of the band on the reverse. As for favorites, definitely that title track, Grand Canvas of the Aesthete, which is lots of fun to pronounce. Also Inhalant Caustic Foray, and likely my very favorite track on here, the Fetching Cranley Gardens. Also check out the closing track, Human Primal Cuts, with some ridiculously fun lyrics and a bit of bounciness to it as well. So the band has a fairly rocky history. They've had 3 breakups. They have a gap of 25 years between formation and first album, and then another 9 years between that and this record. But hearing their latest, I would definitely recommend that they stay this course, because this is really a band that's getting it right and would no doubt excel on future releases. Really digging this album and hope there are more coming out. Check it out. Next up is the 5th studio album from American death metal band Massacre. This is Necrolution, released in 2024 by Agonia Records. So, Fear of the Unknown starts things off and sets the tone for standard classic death metal, but with some interesting added flourishes here and there. Of course, Cam Lee's signature death growls predominate, and I gotta say, throughout the record, I really was reminded of just how many death metal singers have emulated, if not outright copied, Cam's style. Anyways, we get 16 tracks here for a total of almost 47 minutes, which means a lot of short songs, including a few instrumental interludes, or what they call prologues. Not sure I would call their presence excessive, and certainly not Testimony of the Ancients excessive, but some listeners might take issue with them being here. I don't know. Ultimately, I'm fine with them, given their short length, as well as their contribution to the album's mood. Of the 3, I dig Zothic the most for its dark sci-fi tone. And again, I should say that this is no-frills death metal. No bells, no whistles, no complex guitar runs or prog leanings, but there are definitely plenty of moments of heavy brutality, though maybe not consistently so in the strictest sense. But when it succeeds, it very much succeeds, and the track Death May Die is a great example of that effective simplicity. And like last time, we get the guitar team of Raga Johansson and Johnny Peterson, who provide some solid riffs and solos, but likely at the directive of Lee, are probably keeping it relatively simple and classic as well. It's also fair to say that Side B is conspicuously stronger than Side A, so maybe keep that in mind when checking it out for the first time. And of course, if you're a big fan of H.P. Lovecraft, you can be assured that there's plenty of that in many, if not all, of these tracks, including references to movie adaptations of his work, such as Reanimator, From Beyond, Castle Freak, and others. Anyways, vinyl variant on this one is 1 LP Hot Pink, the most brutal of death metal colors. Of course. There you go. I should say that most variants of this album are already sold out, so you might have to really search for this one or wait for a possible reissue. Also, my copy is numbered here in the lower left-hand corner. It's a little hard to see on the back cover. Mine is 216 out of 250 copies. Also, there's an insert. Full lyrics on one side, rest of the lyrics and some credits on the reverse. As for favorites, Death May Die, great track, also Dead Life Reanimator, and especially Curse of the Resonator. I think that's my very favorite song on this one. Also check out the intermittently doomy album closer, Ad Infinitum, The Final Hours. It's pretty strong as well. We got a music video available for Death May Die, as well as a lyric video for The Color Out of Space, both with some killer and catchy choruses. Anyways, find those at the Agonia Records YouTube channel. So like many veteran fans of the genre, I hold Massacre's first album and following EP in rather high regard, and then had really no interest in their other material until 2021's Resurgence came out, which I really dug, and I did cover sometime back on this channel. The band's stated intention on this latest album was to make it a bit of a throwback to the late 80s, early 90s glory days of death metal, and I think they succeeded. Some might find the simplicity not as satisfying, and even I do prefer the Resurgence album, but this record is still a good time, and I do find there's plenty to get out of it. Check it out. Next is the debut studio album from American gothic doom metal band Neon Nightmare. This is Faded Dreams, released in 2024 by $20 Spin. So Neon Nightmare is a one-man project from otherwise Spirit Adrift main man Nate Garrett. And as the album cover suggests, there might be some typo negative worship going on here. But how much, you might ask? Well, let's get into that. The album opens with a vibrating cell phone sound intermixed with frenetic crowd sounds and ambient waves, dropping down a creepy synth and a sad piano run, followed by Garrett's best shot at low-range Peter Steele vocals. And as much as the typo worship is undeniable, there's definitely more going on here than just that. When we get Garrett's upper range vocals a la Spirit Adrift, that typo emulation somewhat vanishes. And it's clear that most of the tracks are far more riffy than typo typically got, notably in the more up-tempo passages. I'm also hearing shades of Black Sabbath, Trouble, and early Danzig making their way into the mix, the last of which is pretty blatant in the opening riff to They Look Like Shadows. Pure John Christ there, but that similarity pops up in a couple other tracks as well. I'm even catching a bit of Smashing Pumpkins swagger in that main riff to LATW 2TG, or Laughing All the Way to the Grave. Kind of weird. Anyways, as a result of this blending, the album is a bit of a doomy gothic love letter to its influences. But yes, mostly typo negative. There's no getting around that. Right down to the emblematic artwork. I should talk about the artwork layout here, though this time swapping out green for blue. Though again, this band does lose that typo script often enough, so don't expect a copycat band here. I mean, this isn't Gruesome or Apocalyptic Raids, though no diss on those bands. I dig both of them, of course. Also get ready for longer songs in this one, averaging between 6 to 8 minutes in length, with the final track Promethean Gift clocking in at almost 10 minutes. So yeah, long songs. Also, just like typo. Anyways, vinyl variant is 1 LP, Electric Blue and Aqua Blue Cloudy. Nice little variant there. Most of the variants are blue and variations of blue, as you can imagine. Also get an insert with that really cool artwork. It's actually a 4-page booklet. Here's the reverse for you. And then the inside has full lyrics, distorted picture of Mr. Garrett, and some credits down here as well. Favorites on this one include It's All Over For You, also They Look Like Shadows, and She's Drowning. Also, music videos are available for Lost Silver, clearly a reference to Josh Silver, and They Look Like Shadows. You should definitely watch both of those at the $20 Spin Label YouTube channel. So if you're looking for Spirit Adrift worshiping at the altar of typo negative, but also bringing in some additional dark influences, you might dig this debut. It's often mellow, accentuated by heavy doom moments. I know some folks are comparing this to Paradise Lost, but I feel that Paradise Lost pulls something very different from typo than Neon Nightmare has, so I don't hear the comparisons in the former. In any case, this one has really taken a hold of me over repeated listens, so I'm definitely digging this. Maybe you will too. Next up is the second studio album from American death thrash band Laceration. This is Aya Road, released in 2024 by $20 Spin. And like Suffer, there are quite a few bands with this name. This is specifically the Laceration from Windsor, California. Just to be clear. Anyways, we get the obligatory death metal intro, this one called Degradation, with ambient crashes and tones. Might have preferred this a little shorter, but it's really splitting hairs. It's fine, because soon enough, the alternating blast and D beats commence, with crushing riffs and melodic flourishes. Very old school, bringing both Morbid Angel and Immolation to mind. Vocals are rough and gaspy in a nice mix of Martin Van Drunen and that guy from Demolition Hammer. You know the one. Anyways, it's clear that there's a favorable balance of nasty and melodic death thrash, often interspersed, which works well once you think that one approach might go too long and then the other one pops in to take over. But maybe fair to say that this is rooted far more often in the heavier end of things. Now, as far as whether this is more death or thrash, gotta say it really rides the line between both, and the band's fairly adept at that too. And keeping with that old school death thrash theme, we have Matt Harvey of Exhumed engineering this record. but also Greg Wilkinson of Autopsy mixing and mastering. Though there are plenty of moments where you could easily imagine this to be a Scott Burns production from the days of old. Definitely getting quite a bit of that. Anyway, some of the solos dip into classic death, as in the band with the sweeps and cascading style you're no doubt familiar with. Lots of palm muting in the general riffs a la Slayer, but that same comparison might also come when those whammy moments arise. And there are a few of them on this record for sure. Anyways, vinyl variant is 1 LP, olive, green, and black merge with neon yellow splatter. Different on each side. You know I love that. Also insert full lyrics and pics of the band and some credits on the reverse. As for favorites, definitely Sadistic Enthrallment, also Vile Incarnate, and Strangled by Hatred. Also really dig the instrumental Dreams of the Formless that ends side 1, so maybe check that one out too. And you know what? The title track is pretty great as well. You know what? Just listen to the entire record. It's pretty great. Anyways, the music video is out for Strangled by Hatred. You can find that one at the 20 Buck Spin Label YouTube channel. So quite a bit of old school death thrash here that harkens back to the early 90s. Think Malevolent Creation or Demolition Hammer, but some fresh and modern ideas are here too. To qualify the latter, I could easily imagine a double bill with Skeletal Remains as a supporting live act, if that hasn't happened already. Also, thanks to viewer Dave for suggesting this album to me. No, not Dave Ingram, but another Dave entirely. Anyways, a solid death thrash record that makes me eager to hear a follow-up release. Good stuff. So just another item I picked up that I have less to talk about, but is certainly worth showing. This is Banzai Records, The Power of the Canadian Steel Blade by Jose Luis Cano Baron and Daniel Delude. For those not in the know, Banzai Records was started in Montreal in 1983, chiefly to distribute foreign metal albums to Canadian fans of the genre. So it's likely the way a metal kid in the 1980s in Canada got into Metallica, Slayer, Exodus, Creator, Destruction, and many other bands. The book goes through a brief history of the label, including releases in their speed metal series, but for the most part, the book has dedicated pages for each and every release of theirs, with artwork, track listings, and various details as well. So if you're looking to round up these records in the aftermarket, this is a really cool guide to use for that. As for me, I'm a huge fan of metal record label books, having already ones on Metal Blade, Noise, Megaforce, Neat, and others. The publisher of this one I should mention is Under Fire Ediciones out of Mexico, and this book can be bought through No Remorse Records and Sonic Age Records if you're interested. And I'll just go through a little bit of it quickly for you. A bit of an introduction, it's a history of Banzai there for you. Also, they do talk about, as I mentioned, the speed metal series, every one of the records they put out for that. Just going into the very first album Banzai ever put out was At War with Satan from Venom. That's kind of cool. Lots of details, as I mentioned. And, you know, it just goes through some other very familiar releases, Kill 'Em All, Fistful of Metal. And, of course, it's tons of this, right? And in the back, you can also check out other books from Under Fire Ediciones, if that strikes your fancy. Definitely cool. Cool little blurb on the back that explains it. You can pause it if you want to do that. But anyways, Banzai Records. Check it out. So finally glad to get to some of these somewhat newer releases, a few of which were very slow in getting here through the mail. I think I talked about this in previous videos. But I gotta say, so many records here, I really dug a lot. But of course, I'm gonna ask the question, how about you? What did you think of these albums? Maybe you have other favorites from these bands, or maybe you have a bunch of new albums that you'd like to mention or even chat about. You should let me know any of that, or maybe if you're enjoying some other stuff on streaming music services these days, in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. Of course, if you've never been to my channel before, my name is Matt. This is The Accusation Network, where each and every week I do videos on metal vinyl collecting, but also classic and modern metal in general. If that sounds like something you want to watch more of, you should definitely consider subscribing to my channel, if you haven't done so, of course. Also, maybe give this video a like and share out my videos in general with some of your friends on social media. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.